Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Around the Clock with Azure SQL and Azure Data Factory. I'm Buck Woody. I'm a senior, or rather, I guess I'm a principal now. I've gotten a promotion. I'm a principal data scientist here at Microsoft. I'm on the SQL Server team, but I'm actually under the same Azure Data group that the Azure Data Factory folks are with. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more today about designing a data architecture with Azure Data Factory. So we're in an architecture style talk. We'll be doing a little bit of tech here and there, but mostly we're going to be staying at the architecture level. And I'm going to give you an absolute ton of resources so you can go see all of the things I do. We're going to jump out to the web. Some of these things are going to be my Microsoft stuff, and some of the stuff is going to be non-Microsoft. We're going to keep it that way. If you want to know more about me, you can just type in aka.ms/. Buck Woody. Now, I've been in technology for a very long time. You can probably tell that very easily. But the general idea there is that I've had just about every role there is. Started out, pulling cables through ceilings. I never want to do that again in my whole life. But I've actually run wiring. I've soldered things on motherboards back when you still did that sort of thing. And I've done operating systems. I've been security admin. I've been a SAN admin. I've worked in as a developer, all these things, but I've always been in the data world. And one of my favorite roles that I've ever had is as an architect. And so I get to do that quite a bit. And I really enjoy that. So I'm hoping that some of the resources that I'll show you today will be useful for you. So once again, this is me. This is what we're doing for the next 20 minutes. And hopefully we have some other housekeeping we need to do here. There's a thing here about a post in the Q&A, if you take a look at that. And you'll see there where you can point them. And there's also the slides. We've printed those out as a PDF. I use the notes view in PowerPoint to put all my resources, so you just can find those links there. If the links aren't valid anymore, just search on the words that are in the link and you'll find the location of where those things are. Okay, let's get started. Lots to cover and a short period of time to go. Well, now, as I've been talking about architecture, we need to kind of disambiguate just a little bit here. The first part of architecture is systems architecture, the entire system itself, or a solution architecture is normally what this is called. Those are actually technically quite different. Systems architecture is how you implement a solution, and a solution architecture wanders through what you're trying to do. We're going to be talking about data architecture in specific, but I'm going to pull you back a little bit into some of that solution and systems thinking as we go. One of the things that I like to do whenever I'm doing an architecture for a solution, let's assume for a moment someone has come to you and said, hey, you're our data expert. We want to do this. We want to do this thing. And they'll immediately tell you how they want things done. But instead of focusing on that, it's more important to focus on what you need to do. Why are you trying to do what you're doing, and so on. This will help you figure this out. But once you've kind of got that main question down, then the next question becomes, how do I figure out to lay this out? What's my sequence? How do I start thinking about these things? Well, the main way I've done that in the past, and Azure Data Factory makes this very easy, is to think about the pipeline itself. And the pipeline basically defines your data flow. You have data that's coming out of somewhere, and more often somewheres. Is that a word? But multiple places, and then you bring data in and you begin to work on it, and then it goes somewhere. And that's basically the general outline of a data pipeline. But in fact, it becomes obviously much more complicated than that. And I think that's what you'll find inside Azure Data Factory. So I'm going to pop over here. This is our first link we're going to jump to. I'm in the introduction to Data Factory in the documentation. Once again, these links are inside your PDF, so don't worry about that right now. Just kind of follow along. And I'm going to pop down. This is all the marketing stuff that tells you exactly what it does and so on. But this is what we're going to focus on. This right here, the pipelines, the activities, data sets, linked services, data flows, and the integration runtimes. Now, perhaps you're brand new to Azure Data Factory. These concepts are new. Perhaps you're an expert and you know how these work and you're here for something else entirely. just to set the lingua franca so that we can get things proper here as we go forward. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The idea is that a data factory has one or more pipelines, and a pipeline is just a logical grouping of activities that does something. That's it. Don't make it any more complicated than that. Once you do that, you'll sort of map data flows. Now, the Azure Data Factory tool itself gives you a nice graphic and actually a few ways to view how this stuff comes together. Now, they've got activity, data sets, and linked services. I'm going to stop here a moment. We're going to get out of order, and we're going to talk about these two things, data sets and linked services, sort of together. We're going to put those two terms together. Basically, this is the data sources and sinks. What's a sink? We know what source is. A sink is where the data ends up, and a sink may become another source. We may start thinking about those terms. All right, so once we have just the idea, and I'll disambiguate these in just a moment, then we can begin to layer activities over the top of those. Those activities might be to copy or move something. Those activities might be to do a very intense machine learning model over the data in flight, and so on. And then when we're done, we've got some triggers and pipeline runs and parameters and a control flow and variables, all kinds of things. We go from there. But the wonderful thing about this is these are the only, these particular words here are the only things you have to learn. It's kind of like the game of chess, though. There's only a few moves that you need to memorize, but then it can become very, very complicated after that. So the neat thing about Azure Data Factory is you only have to use a few primitives to make this true. So let's jump back over to slide world here for just a moment, and we'll go from there. So pipelines, activities, data sets, linked services, the data flows, and the integration runtimes. All right, so when we're doing that, when we're centering on the pipeline, then our next step is sort of to design our architecture. And there's a few things we need to keep in mind here. The first thing I want you to think about is to start with solution-based thinking. I know it sounds a little business, like a term like a business person would use or a sales guy would use, but it's real. The solution thinking means understand what you're trying to do, your opportunity, the requirements and constraints. And I boil everything down when I do an architecture design into requirements. This has to do this, and constraints. It can't do that. So it's an easy way for you to communicate with your business, with your developers, or anyone else that you have to work with as the data architect. To create it is to start thinking about just what does it need to do? What can't it do? Right? And they'll say, well, I don't know. What do you mean, what can't it do? Well, can it leak data? Does it have a security? Well, of course it can't leak data. Okay, we'll write that down. We'll make that a constraint. You're able to use this later in a matrix that I'll show you, and so on. Then you'll need to understand your options, and we're going to get to that dead last, because even with Azure Data Factory, that's the mechanics of getting everything through, but there's stuff underneath. How in the world do you figure out what to use when? Well, the neat thing is we've developed a process for you for that. The next thing you need to think about is your sources and sinks. And you'll need to make sure you understand all of the data you have that you need to work with. Now, something I have to tell people a lot since I'm in the data science world is that you don't have to own all of the data that you're going to analyze. You can pull down data from the stock market, you can pull down weather data, and so on. The other interesting thing is you don't always have to move it. Sometimes you can merely connect to it to read it from another source and pull out only what you need, especially if you find that data changes quite a bit. So this increases your vocabulary of options, we call it, as we go through. Then what you need to do is understand those options, because you're going to develop a choice matrix, and we'll show you how to do that. When you develop this choice matrix, it will tell you exactly what you have to do to get done. Let's pop back over into these places I've got linked for you here. The first one is a really great article from DBTA. I don't know if you read the magazine Database Trends and Applications, but Joe's got a great article here on 8 steps to building a modern data architecture. I don't know, are you a checklist person like me? I love checklists because then I can just go off and tick down what I need to do as long as the checklist is done well. But Joe talks a great deal about everything you need to do. And something I found very interesting that Joe covers is making data governance a first priority. Now, we don't have time today to talk about lineage and governance and provenance and other interesting words, but I will show you a place where you could go forward. The next point he has is very important: build systems to change, not to last. I can't emphasize this enough. If you will objectify your parts such that they are interchangeable. Now we have this data source, we can simply rename it. We've got a different data source. This activity does this work using machine learning services, let's say, but now we're going to do it in Synapse or something else. You're able to do that if you objectify, make an object out of the thing you're working on. Then he goes through some more features. And let me jump down to this one, which we'll be talking about today as well, which is building security in as you go. So there's a lot of these. One of the other links that you'll find is from Guru99. Talks about what a data lake architecture is. Now you're saying, wait a minute, this isn't a data lake talk. No, it's not. But what I will say is that the data lake concepts that you'll find here are incredibly useful as you go through your design effort. So if you don't understand the fundamentals of a data lake, you may think, well, I know it, it's just a bunch of data, right? No, it's actually got some terminology and things you need to know. I'll let you go off and read these things. I've got a little different architecture I'm going to show you here in just a moment. And then this is the part here that I like his graphic that he's got. And notice that there's no sequentiality here. It's not sequential. You do all of these things as you go. You'll be doing these sort of things, lineage and auditing and discovery and so on. Okay, back to the slide world. I know we're popping around a little bit today, but we are doing an architecture level talk in a very short period of time. So as we're designing this, you think about three things: design for solution, requirements and constraints. Know your sources and sinks, and you're going to need to know a lot of them to use a lot of them. And then we're going to figure out a process to know what to use when. The reason I say that is you want to know the process. You don't want to memorize things because they change, and then it's not a solution that changes with you. Solution thinking involves this: the considerations for storage, for compute, and data paths and movements. That's the part that we need to think about. So we're going to go over all of these very quickly. As we think about general architecture, I'm going to show you a great place where you can start with our architecture center that we have for you. This is all listed inside your links as well in your PDF. And then I'm going to show you the well-architected solution. It's kind of an interesting title, but it's got some great information there. And then you'll obviously have to consider DevOps kind of as you go forward. Let me get you to this link here. This is one of the few links I'll actually print, aka.ms/DAG for Data Architecture Guide. We will come to that in a moment. Don't click on that yet. We're moving too fast for you to do that. And then we mentioned those constant considerations for security, lineage, and governance. All right, so now we're going to pop over and I'll show you each of these links. So we were here, we've got this great Azure Architecture Center. Once again, this is all linked for you inside your PDF, but you will see all kinds of patterns here. We used to have a group here called Patterns and Practices at Microsoft. And before I joined many, many years ago, when I ran a fairly large IT department for about a 48,000 person company, I lived and breathed these things. They were amazing, and they've only gotten better. And there's everything you can possibly imagine in the Azure Architecture Center. So I'm going to push you to a specific Azure Architecture article called the Well-Architected Framework. Once again, linked inside your PDF that you'll have. We're working through these because I want to give you a process that you can follow. Everything here, you need to pick a pillar it talks about. Are you doing this because you need to reduce cost? Are you doing this because you need for something to be better? Does it need to be faster? Does it need to have more reliability or security? And you answer, well, of course, it needs all of these things, but one of them is going to be the highest importance for you. So you pick that. Let's pick one. Let's pick a security. And when we pick security, it basically explains everything you need to know, and with more links and more links and more links on everything you need to do, including all of the ops and so on that you need to follow. An amazing resource. Do not overlook that Azure Well-Architected Framework, again, in your PDF. Now we get to the Data Architecture Guide, and when we get to this one, we come down and you can see when I'm thinking about developing an OLTP solution, a data warehouse, analysis, reporting, and so on, Everything is here. So we take, for instance, let's take one, let's do big data, let's say, and let's do a big data architecture. When you come in, here's a huge article that's written for you that explains every portion of this that you need to understand and how it works and its considerations and so on. Some really amazing tools that we have in here for you. Now, one final piece I'll show you is the Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure, which explains all of the things you need to know to adopt Azure Data Factory or any of the things inside the cloud itself. And it has everything you need to do. So you can go to your bosses and say, here's how we plan this, here's how we get ready, here's how we adopt it, here's how we govern and manage. All right, well, we are back to slide world. Is everybody still with me? We're still doing good. All right, I think actually one more, let me pop back out because I think I forgot to mention the security consider. By the way, there's also videos for that Cloud Adoption Framework. I mean, there's every kind of video, once again, all linked for you in there. On our security considerations, we have a complete set of resources for you here that shows the certifications we reach and something you should not miss, which is the Microsoft Trust Center. We have a lot of FAQs there, and if you have an RFP, a request for proposal, that says we need your bona fides for security and all of those things, we've already filled those out for you. I don't know if you've ever been an architect or had to fill out an RFP or create one. They're a nightmare. So we've done those for you, and you can use them as you go through. And we talk about all the ways that you need to secure your data, whether it's at rest or in transit or anything else, and all of the resources you need for security. So let's pop back over. Oh, one more. I forgot one more. This is very important. One of the things I wanted to show you was we now have the new Purview, which is will help you with that governance that I told you about and discoverability. It's a great thing you can hook right into Data Factory. And here's what you can do with it. What does it do? It allows you to identify your data sources wherever they are, even if they're an Excel spreadsheet under somebody's desk or over in Google or wherever they happen to be. You can describe that as an asset. And then what you do is you just do a web search like feature, and you open this up to your organization, and they can quickly say, where's our sales numbers? And it shows them where they are, if they're allowed to see that. Now, it doesn't show the sales numbers, it shows how they get to them. And then they can annotate them, which is kind of interesting. Everyone can add their own labels and their own annotations to do that sort of thing. Just an amazing feature that will help you. And then you can quickly print reports for your governance lineage, so you know where you got the data, when you got the data, who's got access to the data, and much, much more. Okay. Now we go back to slide world. Now I'm allowed to change slides. All right, now we need to know our options and our data sources and sinks. And this is the things we want to talk about. I want to come back to that, those linked services and things I mentioned. So here's the way you think about this. A linked service in Azure Data Factory is like an ODBC driver. I know everybody in ADF right now is cringing, saying, don't say that, but that's really kind of what it is. It's a pointer to where the data lives. The data set is the actual data assets, whether that's a whole asset or a subset, a slice or a piece or a view of that data. Does that make sense? So it's like a connection to Oracle and then a select statement out of Oracle, or a table in Oracle, or a stored procedure in Oracle, if that makes sense. So that's one of the concepts I find people kind of get wrapped around the axle on. What's the difference between those two? So a data set, or rather a link service, points to a data set. We also talked about here briefly this whole idea of the data lake components. I love this graphic. It's from a company called Zaloni. They make a competing product to one of ours, but they use the right language. And so I really like their terminology. And they move data through various zones. Even if you're not setting up a data lake, these zones are very helpful to understand, because it also has within the zone who would use it. Now, this is interesting because in a data lake, we don't remove the data or change it. We change it into another location. We keep both copies, which is kind of interesting to do. So this graphic, also referenced inside your documentation, will have some great terminology, and you need to go read that terminology. We're almost done, and we're almost out of time. How do we know what to use when? I'm glad you asked. We have resources for you. I have a couple of things that I wanted to show you here very quickly. We'll go out of here. The first thing we do is we have an article here on modern data foundations that explains how we lay out our data assets. We show you how that works. And then my good friend Anna Hoffman and my friend Bob Ward and I put together something called the SQL workshops. And this one's really easy to remember. It's just aka.ms SQL workshops. And within that, there's a particular workshop we have. There's a bunch of great resources in here. But one of the workshops we have is called SQL Server Ground to Cloud, where we explained all of SQL, all the way from the ground to the cloud, just as it says. And then Anna and I worked on a particular module in here, and you can see she was even the last one that updated it. And it says what to use when designing a solution. And we have every single step of how you pick what to use when. We've got some examples here you can use to work through, our good friends Contoso and AdventureWorks, understanding that, and then how to create, this is the important part, the decision matrix. And I've even got a full article on how you can understand how to make a decision matrix. Wow, so many resources and such a short period of time that we had to cover. All of the resources I showed you today are linked, and they're in there. And I hope that this short presentation has given you the idea of thinking from a solutions standpoint, starting with sources and sinks, understanding the paths and options you have to move data through, and all of the tools you should absolutely check before you start creating your data architecture. There's a process and you need to follow it. It won't be done in 20 minutes. But we are. Thank you so much for your time. I will meet you over in the chat area. There's a follow-on chat area if you have more questions, and I can answer in the next 15 seconds, and we'll go from there. So let me see what we got. Oh, we've got quite a few questions. Let me see what we got. Question: ingest web traffic for analytics using AMF. Absolute ton. You want stream analytics for Mr. Anonymous or Miss Anonymous. Alice, I wonder if I could use Data Factory on a MacBook. Absolutely. It's all web-based. Can we bring data from other clouds? You absolutely will bring data from other clouds. Does building security into the basics of your database include row-level security? Absolutely. Row and column level security. Well, we're out of time, so we're going to hand it back to the crew, and I'll meet you over in the chat window for more questions. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.